Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly, absolutely critical tension that's shaping our modern world. It's this ongoing tug of war between the rigid, written rule books that govern our planet and the human moral compass that actually guides them. We're going to be talking all about the legal and ethical considerations in the environment and how these two forces interact to literally shape the future of our natural world. Let's get right into it. So, I want you to think about this for a second. Are environmental laws enough to save the planet? It's a pretty heavy question, isn't it? We kind of naturally operate under this assumption that, if we just draft the right legislation, if we just get the perfect legal boundaries down on paper, well, the environment is automatically protected. But rules alone just don't solve everything. They really only set a baseline. It's like a speed limit sign, right? The sign itself doesn't physically stop a car from speeding. In the same way, a regulation alone doesn't actually eliminate environmental harm. To truly understand how we protect our world, we've got to look deeper into the whole shebang, the complex intersections of law, morality, and corporate behavior. Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at laws and governance frameworks. Second, ethics and decision-making. Third, environmental justice and equity. And finally, corporate environmental responsibility. We'll be transitioning from the macro-level legal structures right down to human-centric justice and corporate duties. Starting off with Section 1, Laws and Governance Frameworks. You can really think of these frameworks as the foundational skeleton of environmental management. This is the rigid structural architecture that dictates exactly how society regulates its relationship with nature on an official level. And this brilliantly illustrates how the rules completely shift depending on your scope. On one side, you've got national perspectives. These are your sovereign regulations and domestic laws, totally tailored to a single country's unique needs and economy. But here's the catch. Pollution doesn't respect borders. A river flows through multiple countries, and air currents carry emissions right across oceans. That's exactly why we also have international perspectives, focusing on global treaties and cross-border cooperation. Think about the Montreal Protocol. It was a massive, landmark international treaty that successfully phased out ozone-depleting chemicals worldwide simply because dozens of nations agreed to a shared global vision. So environmental rules shift dramatically when you move from domestic borders up to the global stage, requiring a whole different level of diplomacy. Now, you'll hear the term governance frameworks thrown around a lot in these discussions. By definition, these are the overarching systems, structures, and policies that dictate how environmental rules are implemented, managed, and enforced. I know, the term sounds incredibly abstract. But actually, scratch that. I want you to remember that these frameworks are the very real, albeit invisible structures dictating the quality of the air you breathe and the water you drink every single day. They are the intricate gears turning behind the scenes of literally every environmental law. And tucked right inside those massive governance gears, we find environmental policies. These basically act as the ultimate translator. They take high-level and sometimes extremely theoretical governance concepts and translate them into actionable, on-the-ground steps. Policies are the critical bridge connecting those broad, overarching frameworks to real-world enforcement. Because without policy, a governance framework is just a lofty idea on a piece of paper. With policy, it actually becomes an executable plan. Which brings us to Section 2, Ethics in Decision-Making. Because what happens when a decision is technically legal, but not necessarily fair? So we've got our rules, our frameworks, and our policies in place. But what happens when a law allows an action that just feels wrong? Well, let's look at the sequence. Step 1. The law dictates what is technically allowed or forbidden. Step 2. Policy guides how an organization might legally achieve its goals within those boundaries. But Step 3 is where ethics decides what we actually should do. Legal frameworks often leave wide, gaping holes. They can't possibly account for every single environmental scenario, every brand new technology, or every local nuance. So, ethical considerations must step in to resolve the gray areas where laws and policies inevitably fall short. It's essentially the moral compass taking over when the map completely runs out. Moving on to Section 3, Environmental Justice and Equity. So, if laws and governance frameworks are the skeleton of our environmental considerations, justice and equity represent the beating heart. This is where we zoom in on the micro-level human impact. Now, what's really interesting about these facets of environmental justice is that it requires us to actively balance complex ethical issues against strict legal limits. It's fundamentally about addressing unfair environmental burdens. It forces us to ask the hard questions like, why are heavy industrial zoning or hazardous waste sites so frequently placed near marginalized lower-income communities rather than affluent ones? It demands ensuring fair treatment in decision-making. giving vulnerable communities a real voice, and focusing entirely on the human impact of policy. We're forced to look at the living, breathing stakes behind the frameworks we just talked about. Equity. I just want you to sit with that single word for a moment. Give it the breathing room it deserves. You see, equity is entirely different from equality. It's not just about giving everyone the exact same thing across the board. It's about acknowledging different circumstances, different starting lines, and ensuring everyone has what they specifically need to thrive in a healthy, safe environment. True equity is the ultimate, gold standard goal when we're trying to reconcile strict environmental laws with human morality. And finally, Section 4, Corporate Environmental Responsibility. Let's talk about the businesses. So, how do corporations actually navigate these intersecting and honestly often conflicting demands of law and morality? The crucial point is, when we weigh corporate ethics against environmental responsibility, we see distinct levels of action. At the very baseline, you have legal compliance, basically just doing what the law requires so you don't get slapped with a fine. But as a company's internal ethics increase, you step up to ethical decision-making. That's choosing the sustainable path, even where a cheaper, legally permissible path exists. And at the highest level of overlap, you've got justice initiatives. This is where companies, think of brands like Patagonia, actively invest millions into supply chain overhauls and grassroots environmental grants to right environmental wrongs, going way, way beyond what the law mandates. Ultimately, a corporation's ethical stance directly dictates the ceiling of its environmental responsibility. Which leaves us with this final, lingering thought. When laws fall short, will corporate ethics step up? As we've explored throughout this explainer, the legal frameworks governing our planet, from national policies to international treaties, are absolutely vital. But they are fundamentally incomplete without the ethical compass of the people and the organizations operating within them. The true test of our environmental future relies on justice, equity, and the choices that get made when the law is entirely silent and absolutely no one is forcing a hand. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope this empowers you with a brand new lens the next time you're reading up on environmental policy. Keep learning, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.